So I wanted to, hopefully folks can see my screen. So as a bit of a longer introduction, Luki Danukarjanto, usually I tell people to ignore the last name because it's difficult, but this is probably the one audience where people can actually pronounce and say the last name. So I was born in Jakarta, and I moved to Canada and to Toronto specifically when I was very young. So I grew up in the Toronto area. My background, as Willie had mentioned, is in computer science. And I did that because my dad worked at IBM. For those that know IBM, it's one of the big computer companies out there. I was a teenage boy that was very into computer games, and the Silicon Valley place was growing at that time. So this was kind of circa 2001 to 2002 when I graduated. So there's a lot of things happening in there. But unfortunately, when I graduated, the dot-com bubble had burst. So if folks know that time period, a lot of the dot-com companies kind of crashed, and it was actually really hard for folks to get a job in technology, right? But luckily, I had a friend whose brother was working at a company, and he helped me get an interview, and I got the job. As even more luck would have it, that company was Deloitte. So Deloitte is one of those the big four accounting firms, but I actually ended up joining the consulting side. So for anybody that knows what consulting is, it is basically helping companies be better in terms of business or technology or how they leverage their people. So I spent over 12 years there, and I basically grew up from a developer at the bottom, and I was coding, and then I moved into things like business analysis, testing, change management, training, project management, advisory. Those are a whole bunch of jobs and careers I never even knew existed when I was in school. So there's probably a lot more out there that a lot of you have never even thought of. You think of kind of the traditional ones and the basic ones, but there's a whole bunch of things out there that you have yet to explore. So I encourage you to do that. So I ended up spending over 12 years at Deloitte, and I was in the firm. And by the time I was leaving, I was kind of a senior manager. Next step would have been partner. So for those that know what partner is, it's kind of the C-level executive, kind of the top level that is up there. And while I was there, I also did a lot of campus recruiting or talent activities. So I actually ran the undergrad campus recruiting program, which actually meant that I literally had the list that said yes or no for any of the hiring that we did out of all the universities across Canada. So for those of you who are interested in getting a job in consulting or in that area, then I know a thing or two about kind of resumes, interviews, and networking and all that good stuff around there. So feel free to reach out if that's an area that you're interested in. But a lot of people hear that story and they're like, wow, you were already kind of successful and you had made it. So how did you end up here? And for me, the short answer was family, right? I traveled quite a bit as a consultant, so mostly to the US. And basically, I was on a plane Monday morning and then back on Thursday evening. And I end up having kids and watching my kids grow up over FaceTime. So kind of like this on a screen, but this is obviously pre-COVID. And they would be learning to like walk and talk and roll, and they weren't, well, in my presence. And that wasn't the type of dad that I want it to be. And usually if I do this presentation in person, then I usually get a few pity like, aw, because people feel sorry for that situation. And it's harder to tell on webinar, but that's kind of the situation that I was in. So what to do? So I ended up doing a lot of kind of soul searching, self-reflecting, and talking to mentors. And as Willie had mentioned, I also ended up writing a book. It's called Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, and basically reflected on a lot of that stuff. And a lot of it I'll cover in, at least at a high level in this presentation. But I'll share a little bit of those insights. And I end up making a decision that, you know what, I feel that there's a need for folks to kind of explore, right? Because sometimes you're on the path, I call it the conveyor belt of life, right? So you go to school, thump, and you get a degree, and then thump, you get a job, and then you thump, you get a promotion, and then you get married, and you have kids, and all that sort of stuff, and you just keep going. And then you're 65, and is that it? Versus, well, did you actually have a lot of meaning and a lot of value and purpose to your life and your career? And that's a lot of things that folks don't think about, especially for if you have the privilege of being able to go to school abroad, right? So if you have that choice, you're in a very privileged situation. So I would probably take some time to kind of be grateful and count your blessings that you're able to do that. Because a lot of people, they don't have even that choice or that opportunity. And if you're going to make a choice, then obviously Canada is a great place to be. I'm a little bit biased, given that I grew up here and have spent a lot of time there, but I think that's something to consider, at least put closer to the top of your list, right? So on that, I decided to start my own firm. So I did that at circa 2015, and I've been doing it for about 6 years now. As Welly mentioned, I have a podcast, I have YouTube videos, and I have an app that I'm building or having built as well. So even though I'm computer science, I haven't really coded in a long time. So I'm having other people build it. And that is a far cry from me as a very shy, introverted kid. Because if you remember, I was in computer science. So I'm very stereotypical, that kid in the corner that really kept to themselves. So when people see me today, they're like, whoa, what happened? You're totally different from when I knew you growing up, because I almost didn't know you existed at times because you were so quiet and so introverted in the corner. But I was able to take some of the experiences from school, from work, and a lot of it is probably the environment in Canada that helped me grow and succeed, right? So now I work with a lot of the schools, and I insert kind of soft skills programming. I've actually changed it to human skills because they're not soft, they're not negotiable. There are things that everybody should have. So things like effective communication, time management, how to build relationships, learning to learn. Like, why don't they teach you how to do that? Because there are ways to do it. There are better ways to do it. And unfortunately, you either figure it out or you don't. But what if you had a book, a course, a mentor, or someone that could show you how to do that? How much more successful would you be in your life? And more of that is coming out there. And that's ideally what I want to bring into the world. So I work with a lot of schools to do that. I work with companies as well, and I have one-on-one clients too. And I also support a lot of the youth entrepreneurship because I believe a lot in finding your own career path. And one of the ways to do that is actually to start your own business. Now, not everybody should do that because there are a lot of challenges in terms of that, and not everybody has that type of mentality. But I encourage folks to at least explore to see if that is something that you might want to do. I also teach at some of the schools and impart my knowledge and experience there. And hopefully I'm able to get home and spend time with my kids, right? Because that's the whole reason I was on this journey to begin with. So even though I have huge aspirations and big goals, I also understand that, well, I need to live my life and I need to be a good dad and have a good family as well. So I believe that you can have that balance. I actually call it more integration instead of balance. Because if you think about it, when you balance like a butter knife, right, which is kind of flat on both sides, the balance point is right on the middle, right? But if you try to balance a spoon, which has one fat end, the balance there is really close to the fat end, right? So sometimes balance is not 50-50. Sometimes it's 80-20, 60-40, or something different. So just a thought and perspective. So that's a little bit about me, just to kind of put some context around it. And hopefully that gives you some good background on it. And I would love if folks are willing and interested to ask any questions, feel free to pop them in the QA and I'll try to address them throughout the session, or Welly will help me kind of go through that. We'll also have a Q&A, so if you have more at the end, feel free to kind of save them for later as well, just in case I do answer it. So a couple of things that we'll cover. The talk is about kind of future-proofing your career. So we'll do a little bit of a discussion on careers, at least my perspective on it, right? And I'll give you some skills to help you future-proof that. And a little bit of discussion on Canada and how studying will help. And my promise to you is that if you actually listen and use a lot of these skills that I present, then you'll be much more successful and you will have kind of future-proofed yourself and your career. So hopefully that sounds good to everyone. And if there are no questions before we go, then I'll proceed. And like I said, I want this to be as interactive as possible. So hopefully folks can start typing in the chat. And I encourage you to be active, right? So if you can, if you want to, well, your name is probably already in there, but if you want to put your area of interest, right? So if you're more interested on the sciences side or the business side, the humanities, or any specific area, if you're planning to be a doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, like those typical ones that are there, right? If you have a particular school or program or area of interest that you want to get in, then let me know, and that'll help me contextualize some of the discussions that I have. And even if you can, what is a dream career, right? Did you always want to be a fill in the blank there, right? And this could be like after you graduate, this could be uh, uh, in forever, right? Like if you always wanted to be, I remember talking to someone and they wanted to be a starship captain, right? They were a very big Star Trek fan, for anybody knows what that show is, but they wanted to pilot a spaceship. And I was like, cool. So how could you get that? And they were curious, like, what do you mean? That's a fantasy. That's not something that I can do. But he thought about it, and I kind of walked him through the process. And he said, you know what? If I go maybe to the States and work with either Elon Musk or Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos, they're all trying to go into space and do that. And it's like, oh my gosh, I might not be on like Elon's first mission to Mars, but I might be on his seventh. I might not be on Richard Branson's first launch into space, but I might be on his 28th, right? And he's like, oh, wow, I could actually be a Starship captain. So a lot of the things that I do with folks is try to unlock their potential. So whatever your dream career, you could possibly get it, right? And obviously there are limits depending on the effort that you put in, but I don't want that to be something that holds you back. I want kind of the reality to be what holds you back, not your dreams. So if folks can type in, I have some folks in the chat, they're interested in building their own career, but how does one properly start? And if you're quite young and unexperienced, how will you get people's attention? Okay, so we can potentially take a look at that question. There's some folks interested in media studies, some folks in BC. Ooh, a news anchor. Oh, that sounds pretty cool. Sounds like kind of like a YouTuber from now, at least that's the current day, because I don't know too many people who actually watch a lot of TV, but there's definitely different ways to do that. But thanks for those that are peppering the chat, and I'll continue. So I want to start off with a question again to try to make this as interactive as possible. But the question that I have for you is, does where you went to school determine your success? Simple true or false question. And just simply type true or false, true or false, whatever you think. And I'll save the answers to that question until the end, but I'd love folks to put true or false, true or false. Ooh, overwhelmingly false, 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 false. Some question marks. Oh, true, 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 true. There's a couple of trues there. All right, it's a good mix. And I probably should have done this as a poll, but I wanted folks to start chattering in there and get used to typing. So that's why I kind of did it this way. But I'll leave the answer to the question to the end. Oh, we have a hand up there. I don't know, Welly, do we want to take questions now, or should we pause till the end? Or Sunny, maybe if you can type your question into the chat, and then maybe we'll have make sure that it's saved there, right? Does that make sense for you, Sunny? And if it makes sense, you can put down your hand. If not, then we'll keep going. All right, so I'm gonna just keep going unless Welly tells me otherwise. But all right, so the questions, I wanted to move on the first topic on careers, right? So what are the careers in demand? And I did a bunch of research. There's a whole bunch of websites on there. You can say careers in demand globally within Indonesia, within Canada, or wherever else that you want to end up going, you can put them. And generally speaking, on a world scale, these are the top ones, right? And depending on which list you look at, there are different ones that are at the top. Sometimes they're kind of one or two, but it seems to be dominated right now by engineers, well, specifically software engineers, right? So for those of you who are familiar with all like the tech companies, like most of the biggest companies out there are things like Apple, like Amazon, Facebook, and all that sort of stuff. There are huge tech companies there. And there's a lot of talent. There's a war on talent for people that are going in and also doing a lot of technical work, right? So a lot of these tech companies are growing, and as a result, there are a lot of people trying to get into it. But there's also electrical, mechanical, so self-driving cars, all like the drones that are being built. There's a lot of infrastructure being built. So there's like a lot of mechanical and civil engineering and electrical that has to be built. As cities grow, more people are moving into there. So there's a lot of demand and need for engineers. There's also a ton of demand for nurses and doctors and other medical practitioners. And obviously, in the time of COVID, that most of us were not prepared. Most countries were not prepared. So there was a shortage of all of those pretty much everywhere, right? And it's actually a lot of burnout that's happening there too, because it is a rough career. If you're kind of the first front line, and you have to work lots of shifts, and you've probably seen some of the posts online where people or the healthcare practitioners are like have all the indentations around their face for all the masks and stuff that they wear, and all the different challenges that are there. There's a lot of need in there. And one of the interesting things that I found from a healthcare practitioner is that there's an uptick on the need for psychologists, right? There's a challenge with mental health and mental wellness, where a lot of folks, because they're at home and not really connected with friends and family and able to do a lot of the relaxation that they would normally have, like to go out and spend with others and all that stuff, then mental wellness is on the decline, and there's a lot more anxiety and depression that's happening these days. So that necessitates the need for more psychologists, right? There's always need for accountants, right? At some point at the business level, whatever job you end up, it's got to make money, right? And in order to make money, there's got to be someone tracking it. So there's always a need for those accountants. And then data is becoming one of them. And where I'm seeing a lot of that is things like AI and machine learning. So for those that know that field, it's really just taking lots and lots and lots of data and making sense out of it and making predictions and turning it into a machine learning algorithm and artificial intelligence type of algorithm there. So those are definitely ones there that globally. And then teachers are on the other side. So with a lot of the countries going virtual, there was a big need because they were scrambling to get people. Sometimes they need more teachers to cover the same amount of students. So there's a big uptick there. And the other part is there's, similar to the nurse side, there's a big exodus there where a lot of the hybrid learning, the online learning is challenging a lot of teachers. So a lot of folks are leaving, they're retiring early and all that sort of stuff. So there's a big gap that is coming up into that space as well, right? What I found interesting is like the traditional L. So in kind of my world with the folks that I do with, there's this concept of deal or no deal, right? And what deal stands for is doctor, engineer, accountant, lawyer, right? So I didn't really see lawyer, that L, on this list, or anything in kind of the top 10. But if you go kind of down towards the past 10 and 20, then lawyer's still up there because folks at some point will need services in order to do that. So those are the ones that are kind of in demand. And if you look at the list ongoing for kind of the past kind of 10, 20 years, it's roughly the same, right? There's always a need for engineers, there's always a need for doctors, stuff needs to get built, people need to get taken care of, businesses need to be run. Data analysts and teachers are kind of a little bit new for kind of the past couple of years, but that's what they are. And if what you're doing and if all you're looking at is demand in terms of what you want to do, then I encourage you to think of something a little bit different. Because sometimes when you look at a career and all you focus on is what is hot and what do people need at any given time, well, that changes, right? So I take my case in point. When I graduated, Silicon Valley computer science was the thing. Everybody wanted to do that. Unfortunately, my timing was that when I graduated, nobody wanted it. It was really hard for folks in tech to get a job. After I graduated, the next thing was finance. Everyone wanted to get into like investment banking and portfolio management and all that sort of stuff. But shortly thereafter, 2008, 2009, the financial meltdown happened, and things were challenged there. And then in kind of my circles, a lot of people wanted to do like travel, tourism, and hospitality. And obviously that's when COVID happened, where it kind of ground everything to a halt. So if you're often looking at demand, then demand changes. And it almost went full circle because like I mentioned before, engineers being kind of one of the top interested areas, that is kind of now top and similar to when I was graduating when I got out of university. So a lot of things are cyclical, and yes, it might help you a little bit when you first graduate because there might be some peak demand, but oftentimes then with their peak, there's a value. There's always a peak and a value somewhere in the market. So when you think about the career that you want, I encourage folks to think about a couple of things, right? So one is there's the demand, of course, like is it relevant and needed in the world? And pretty much every job out there is some sort of demand. Now, whether it's the fad or the in thing at any given time, really depends on timing. And you might luck out on that, you might not, depending on it. Another thing you want to look at is kind of the livelihood, right? So the reality is certain jobs pay more than others, right? Doctors tend to get paid more than teachers, right? Although teachers in Canada, they get paid pretty well, right? But relative to a doctor would tend to make more. Engineers make a good living, and all the ones that were kind of listed in the top, you could probably make a pretty good living there. Now, it depends on where you live, because if you're like in the heart of downtown Toronto or Vancouver, one of the bigger cities, it might be a little challenging depending on the type of house or apartment that you want to get. But some people choose because they want a good livelihood, they want to make a lot of money, they want a good status as well, right? So another consideration that people have is ability, right? So you might have been in high school and say, hey, I was good at the subject, right? What often happens when I have discussions with folks is they end up in a certain area because they weren't good at the other ones, right? So I wasn't good at science, and I specifically, I really sucked at chemistry, which means I went into business, right? Not because I liked business, but because I was good at it. I was okay with numbers, that sort of thing. Or that could be the other way, where I gravitated towards the sciences. I was really good at physics, so therefore I went kind of the engineering route. Or it could be more, I was great at writing, so I moved more into the humanities of it, right? So sometimes it's ability that you do. What I encourage folks to think about is at some point in time to marry that with your interest and passion, right? And for those that have read that quote that's below there, it's one that it's coming up more and more with the people that I discuss with. And it's if you choose a job you love, you will never have to work a day in your life, right? And I actually feel that in my work that I'm doing now, I probably work just as much as I did as a management consultant, one of the big four. I did a lot of work and putting a lot of hours in the day. But the thing is, for me, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like I'm actually doing stuff that's purposeful and awesome. And imagine that you can have a career like that, right? And yes, if you have something like that, you can get good at it, right? Because if you naturally love it and are interested in it, you'll spend more time to improve, right? Now there are always limits to that, but generally, if you spend more time, you improve. And if you're good at something, then people pay well for it. There's another expression that I like that says, if you um, you get paid in two things. You get paid in experience and you get paid in money. Get paid in experience first, and then the money will come, right? Because you tend to want to work with the best whatever, the best engineer, the best doctor, the best accountant, the best lawyer, the best whatever it is. And if you're good at it, then you will make a great livelihood, and you will always be in demand as well, right? The challenge is if you do something that you're good at, you're okay at, but you're not really that interested, and it was just hot at the time, then you become kind of that mediocre person at the middle, and you don't really want to do it for the rest of your life. And that's when people often get stuck, right? So I encourage folks to, well, you have to take a balanced approach. You can't necessarily do one or the other, but understand really how could you combine them? Could you choose something that you are good at and interested in as well, and then turn it into a livelihood and follow the demand curve wherever it is, right? So those are a couple of things that I encourage you to think about as you look at something as a future career. Now, if we move on to the kind of next major topic of future-proofing your career, right? And building some of the skills that are there. And we talked a little bit about the demand, right? And I shared with you that basically the demand fluctuates. It goes up and down and changes depending on the season, the cycle, the decade that you're in, right? There's always demand for everything, but not necessarily at its peak or value. But there's always demand for the good people, the great people in any particular area. So whatever you choose to do, I encourage you all to be great at it, right? You won't start great at the beginning, but you'll slowly get better and better and better there. One of the things, or some of the things that I encourage you to think about are these soft skills, right? So I mentioned that I call them human skills because I think everyone should have these, right? These, in my opinion, are really the future-proof skills that if you can find a college, a university, a school that will teach you these, then this is where you win, right? Because if you actually look at the most successful people around you, they are people that have mastered any and or all of these, right? And it's simple things like time management, organization and execution, as in, can you actually get things done, right? When you say you're going to do it, do you actually do it, right? And it might be getting away from like procrastination and saying, I'll do it later, I'll do it tomorrow. Well, if you look at the most successful people, they're the ones that don't wait till later. They do it now, and they get it done, and they do the next thing and the next thing, and by multiplying all of their time and advantages, they grow and grow and grow and more. So whether you do that in the context of business, whether you do it in STEM, whether you do it in the humanities, or whatever you choose, just learn to do it and learn to do it well, and follow up and really show up instead of just waiting till later and doing whatever it is whenever it gets done, right? And oftentimes, in order to even get that, there's an element of emotional intelligence and what's called emotional flexibility that needs to happen, right? So intelligence is great, but it's only great when you use it, right? So flexibility is when you actually put into practice, right? And for a lot of the folks that are probably in this situation, you might have some challenges in your head, right? In terms of you might have that little voice that talks to you about like, oh, I can't do that, or I'm never going to be successful, or I'm not sure if that's the right decision, or things like that, right? And oftentimes that stops you from really executing and doing well and doing all the other things that you want, right? And if you can master that intelligence and that flexibility, then a lot of this stuff just becomes so much easier. And oftentimes that manifests itself in the relationships and the people that you connect with as well, right? So there's an expression, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And if you actually look at a lot of the successful people in the world, you'll know that's very true. But I actually extend that and I say that it's not who you know, it's who knows you, right? That's what's really important, because a lot of people have tons of Facebook and LinkedIn connections and Instagram followers and all that sort of stuff. But if you were to actually message any one of them, would any of them actually help you or do you a favor? Maybe not, right? But the ones that might have a small core network, but have a lot of close friends that would basically kind of do anything for them and go to war with them and basically do anything for them, well, that's what you want to have. You want to cultivate those really solid and strong relationships. And often that starts with giving first and helping other people. And if you can learn to do that, then you can succeed a lot more in life. And take it from someone who didn't think that was important. Remember, I started off in computer science, right? So I had very little friends. In university, I remember specifically I only had 2 friends, right? Which is a little bit sad, right? In my program, I had 2 people that I kind of hung out with. Otherwise, I didn't really hang out with anybody. But now I teach courses on networking and how to build meaningful connections and things like that. So started from kind of the bottom, and now we're here, right? If anybody knows who Drake is, that's kind of a credence to one of his songs. But relationships are something that I encourage you to invest in, because those often are the pay dividends over in the end, right? And with relationships comes things like teamwork, right? And oftentimes, if you're in a team, there's some conflict resolution that has to happen, because you're not necessarily going to align well with everybody, right? And in order for any of and all that stuff to happen, you have to be able to communicate, right? So whether it's going to be in English or Bahasa or any other language that you come in, well, China is pretty popular, so Mandarin is probably a good language to learn at some point as well, for those of you who haven't done that. But it's whatever language is appropriate for that particular area that you're in, you want to be able to communicate well. And with all of these things, they are skills, right? So even building relationships, some people are more natural at it. Some people need some effort. Again, I was someone that invested the time and I became better at it. Same with communication. I didn't talk for a while, right? Not that I was mute or anything, but there was a lot of times where I would hate public speaking and presentations. But now I do that on a regular basis. My natural tendency is to be an introvert. So after the session, I'll be like, whew, I'm glad that's over, and I need to recharge. And plus, it's close to midnight here, so I'll probably go to bed. But other than that, like it's a skill that you can develop, just like a muscle that you work out. So you start off with like the 5 pounds, and then you do 10, 20, 50, and then you're doing a lot because you've trained along the way. Another thing that I mentioned before was learning to learn, right? And it is a skill that you can master, right? Because if you think about it, and if you really understand the human brain, then you'll know that humans were not meant to learn kind of long lists of abstract things, right? So if I were to give you a list of, let's say, 20 things, right? Science dictates that you'll probably remember 7 plus or minus 2. So something like 5 to 9 items on that list of 20. But if I said instead to close your eyes and imagine your front door, going from your front door to your bedroom, and name me 20 things along the way, you could probably name me 50. Mainly because, at the side there is your closet. In your closet, there's a bunch of jackets there. There's a side table, it has that, and up the stairs is whatever it is. Because people are visual, right? They're more spatially oriented because ancestrally as humans, we need to know where the fruit trees were, where the water was, where the lions lived, right? So that we didn't get eaten, and we need to know where we could eat, right? And if you understand that, then imagine how easy it would be to memorize your physics theories or textbooks or whatever, or the accounting principles that you have to learn, right? Why don't they teach those in school, right? That's one of those things that if you learn all that, it gets better. And then one of the last things that I encourage you to all develop is creativity and problem solving, right? Those are some of the things that will keep you future-proof, mainly because it's one of the last things that the AI and the machine learning and the apps will take over. Because every day you hear of an app that does something, right? I actually recently heard of an artificial intelligence program that's going to largely replace lawyers, right? Because it can take a legal precedent and take the defendant and the proponent side and basically say, with 87% accuracy, this is going to be which side wins, right? So when you have something like that, why do you need a lawyer, right? Now, you always have the top level lawyers because they're the ones that are going to have to program this thing and make sure it works. And then you're going to have the low level lawyers that basically the ones that nobody can do because it's too low level. And it's going to be the ones in the middle that are really challenged, right? But creativity and problem solving, and those are probably going to be the last things that the machines and the AI take over. So if you can really focus on that, then it'll help. And creativity in this case is not necessarily art. It's not necessarily a painting or a drawing. It's coming up with new uses and novel and original ideas. So something like Airbnb is super creative. It's creative as a business model because traditionally, in order to rent out rooms, you need to own properties, you need to own buildings and things like that. But Airbnb did it without any of that infrastructure in there. So super creative. Even things like Uber, right? They kind of leverage that same or similar concept and turned it into kind of the sharing economy, right? So I encourage you to take any and or all of these and pick one and improve it. Pick all of them and improve it. The simplest one that I use to start off with is the time management one, right? So one thing that I would encourage you to do to really help you future-proof your career is to create what I call non-negotiable time. So as busy as all of you all have 30 minutes that you can spare, right? Either first thing in the morning or maybe just before you go to bed or maybe sometime during the day, 30 minutes, right? And if you think about it, spending 30 minutes a day for an entire year, then that's about 180 hours, which is a work month, right? People typically work like 40 hours a week times 4 weeks. That's a whole month, a whole work month that's extra, right? So you get 13 months instead of 12. And you do that over the course of your career, your life, and how much more compound interest or compound growth can you have? So that little thing, that little 30 minutes a day to do all this other stuff, right? To read some books on emotional intelligence, to build some relationships and connections with people, to practice communicating and going out there, to learn how to learn any of these memory techniques or learning techniques, these note-taking techniques that I mentioned, or just practice being creative, right? So if I can share one thing to help you future-proof your career, it's taking the time to do all that. And then with that time, you can do a whole bunch of other things. So hopefully that's giving you some good and useful content in order to help future-proof your careers. And I encourage you to not follow kind of all of those kind of trends and the fads, because they change. And the thing is, whether it's a trend or a fad, you might hop on it at the right time, you might not, right? You'll never know. And the challenge is, in order for you to even do it, you'll have to predict at least 4 years in advance, 3 years if you do a short program, that sort of thing, 5 years if you take an extra long time or do some co-ops or work terms, that sort of thing. So you'll have to almost be predicting the future, because you won't know, because in order to complete your degree or career or whatever, it'll take you some extra time. So just being aware of that. And what I encourage all of you to do is, whatever you decide to pick, and having the foundations of all the different soft skills out there, I encourage all of you to gain experience, right? So this is one of those things where a lot of folks, they go into school, and it goes back to our initial question, is the degree enough, right? And for me, I think it's a good starting point, but I don't necessarily think it's enough, right? Because now the world is getting more competitive. It seems that everybody has a degree, right? Especially if you go to a place like Canada. That's a place where so many people, there are so many smart people, visa students, local students that have it. It's competitive, right? And not any different from any other country. But one thing that definitely differentiates yourself is work experience, right? Because you might have a 4.0, you might have an A average in your schoolwork, but you haven't necessarily done it, right? Because school is an academic context, right? To put it in a different way, so let's pretend that you are trying to find people for your swim team, right? So you're starting at like a swim club, and you want people to swim competitively. Would you rather pick the person who has read every single book about swimming, right? Every single book, every periodical, they know everything academically in and out about swimming? Or would you rather pick the person who's been doing laps for the past 4 years, right? Well, chances are you're going to pick the one who's been in the pool, right, doing it, right? And that's what things like co-op and internships get you, right? They get you time in the pool, right? They give you work experience in an actual work environment, right? Now, not all programs have co-op. Not all of them have internships. So if you're lucky enough to have one, then I encourage you to do that, because the system, the school actually helps you in order to get that role and the learning that you have there. Otherwise, there are a lot of them, and I know Canada's leading the way in terms of like work integrated learning, where certain provinces actually are looking for 100% compliance on work integrated learning, which basically what that means is, during the courses, your courses that you do, there's got to be some component where it relates to something in industry, right? So whether you are doing a project for a company, and there's an actual employer that kind of scores you and grades you at the end, or you're getting requirements and working with like a government agency or whatever to help you, then it brings the real life problems into the classroom so that you can actually solve them. So they're not just academic assignments, they're real life things. And oftentimes what actually happens is the employer will actually take one of the solutions, probably one of the A ones, and actually implement one, sometimes even more than one, because there might be more great solutions. You could also get it through a part-time job, right? And sometimes it's not direct experience depending on the type of job, but you can do it part-time in terms of the work. Volunteering is another great thing that there's a lot of those types of opportunities, and there's a big culture around volunteering in Canada that I'm aware of. And you can do things. So whether it's on the business side or the science side or humanities side, there's a lot of different opportunities there. Also a personal project. So if you don't want to go out there, do it yourself. So if you're in computer science like I was, go code something, go build your own app, right? If you're on the data side, go do some research and grab some data sets and analyze something and put together a model and do that, right? It doesn't have to be for anyone but yourself, but those are great things that you can put on a resume and actually get people to want you to do that. Or there's a new concept called freelancing, right? Where you can actually do the work, and oftentimes you'll have to do some of the other stuff in order to get experience, but you can actually sell your services, sell your time in order to complete projects, right? So I encourage you to take some time to hone your skills. So not just read all the books, but also get in the pool and actually be able to do that. And I know it's tough to be in school and you're focused on that grade and whatever, but at the end of the day, it's oftentimes the experience that matters most. And the interesting thing is that later on, people focus more on the experience, and sometimes they don't even care where you went to school, right? But if that place where you went to school often gives you great foundations in order to really excel in your career path, right? So those are a couple other things I encourage you to do. And in order to make that happen, I think I mentioned it before, is in order to do it, put that non-negotiable time into your calendar, right? And one of the first things that I encourage you to do is to find mentors, right? And it could be an alumni. An alumni is someone who graduated from your school previously, who's done it before, who is doing the job that you want, right? Because if they're doing that, then they have the roadmap. They've already done it. They're just 5 years ahead of you, 10 years ahead of you, and you could potentially follow that path. Now, the world 5 or 10 years ago is quite different, right? So you can't follow that path directly, but you can often have clues in terms of how to get there, right? And when you find those mentors, when you get that advice, when you get that stuff I wish I knew earlier, then you get to upgrade your problems, right? And what I mean by that is you don't get to do the silly problems that they made mistakes on. You skip those and do the more challenging ones that they haven't yet focused, and hopefully you do that. And I encourage all of you to build your habits. So things like that non-negotiable time, things like time management, relationship building, and all those different soft skills, building your habits, right? Even something simple like eating well, exercising, getting a lot of good sleep, those are some foundational stuff that if you don't do that, then all the other stuff gets much harder, right? And as part of that, I'd love you to all take some time to reflect, learn, and grow, right? So those are a couple of things that I encourage you to do. One of the things that I have is what I call 5-2-2-1 journaling, right? And what that is spending 5 minutes a day, right? Get a notebook, get a Google Doc or a Word document, whatever it is, and spend 5 minutes writing down 2 minutes on what you did that drained you today. You know, those things that you did, it's like, oh my gosh, if I don't have to do this again, I'll be a happy person, right? That might be through school, that might be through work, that might be through whatever it is, right? But try to be as specific as possible. Don't just write one line, write specifically, who was I with? What was I doing? What was the context, the time of day, all that sort of stuff, right? And then the next 2 minutes is on the things that energized you. So those things that you did, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so awesome. I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of a state of flow, right? If you've ever been in the state of flow where you lost track of time, it's like, oh my gosh, it's almost midnight. Well, here it actually almost is midnight, but oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here and doing all those things that you almost lost track of time, right? Again, be specific as much as you can. And then the last minute that's there, try to figure out how you can minimize the first and maximize the second, right? Sometimes you can't get rid of the first, which is why I say minimize, but what you want to do is maximize the second. And what you see is over the course of a week, over the course of a month, over the course of the year, you see patterns, right? And hopefully that will indicate to you what are the things that you actually love, the things that have your ability, and things that you're actually good at, right? And if you can do that, then you'll definitely have an amazing career because you'll be directed to the things that you naturally gravitate to, that you're good at, and then you get better at, right? So I encourage you all to make the time to do all these things and then grow and grow and grow and really future-proof your career. And then as I say that, a lot of you probably said, nah, I can't do that. And I encourage you to think about what's holding you back, right? And oftentimes the excuses I get are, oh, I can't because I've never done it before, right? And to me, in my opinion, that's probably like the worst excuse in the world, right? And the main reason why is because everything that you've pretty much done, you've done because you previously never did it before. Like you walked, and previous to that, you never walked. You talked, and you never talked before. You learned to study, read, drive, type, right? Whatever you're doing, or thumb typing, depending how you do it. Before you did it, you didn't know how to do it, right? So everything that you kind of do, you've never done before. So that should be not an excuse because everything that you learned and done started with you not being able to do it. Some people use the excuse of lack of time, lack of money, lack of connections, that sort of thing. Those are pretty common ones. And with time, well, I've already given you a suggestion to make that time, to make that non-negotiable time, right? Money, well, use some of the time to make some money, right? If you want connections, use some of that time to make some connections, right? You might have to spend some money too, but make connections, right? Another big one is fear, right? And it's usually either the fear of failure, fear of judgment, and sometimes, which I found interesting, is fear of success, because your friends might be at a certain level and you fear that if I move up to this other level, then I might lose touch with my friends. So I find that a new and interesting phenomenon that some people are actually encountering over time, right? Um, and for kind of fear and kind of just the mental side, what I encourage you to do is take a look at this quote that I have. And it's a quote from Shakespeare, which I never thought I'd be quoting Shakespeare when I was a computer scientist. But basically it says, for there is nothing good or bad, and thinking makes it so, right? So if you take a minute to think about it, nothing is either good or bad. It's you that assigns meaning to it. So if you say COVID, the COVID is COVID. It's not good or bad. It just is, right? For some people, it was the most challenging time in their entire life. For other people, it was the biggest boom and opportunity for them too. What's the difference? Oftentimes, it's thinking that made it so, right? So you can always choose to think of something as a limitation or think of it as an opportunity, right? So I encourage you to take that time and change your mindset so that you can kind of grow it there as well and move away from holding you back. So the last little topic that I want to talk about is kind of taking all that and framing it against kind of the reasons to study in Canada. So we've got a lot of amazing schools there. And if you look at a lot of the world rankings, we're somewhere up in there. Now we're not as big as some of like the American schools, like the Harvards or whatever, right? And I think they just have a little bit better marketing, but the quality of the students in Canada are top notch, right? Canada's an amazingly welcoming and country, right? And it's poised to kind of take over. So a lot of the US assets and other assets are moving into Canada because they see a lot of the promise that the country is providing. It's got a great quality of life. If you look at a lot of the indexes around the world, low crime rate, free healthcare, that sort of thing. We've got a lot of good resources, natural resources there, and it can be relatively affordable compared to some of the other kind of tier one countries out of there, especially if you use stuff like co-op, right? And like I mentioned, co-op is very pervasive in a lot of the schools in Canada and probably more so in Canada than the rest of the world. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I mean, again, I'm a little bit biased, but I think it's a super important thing to consider as well. So I think I'm approaching time and we've covered a lot. I gave you some careers in the future, and really it's just more to, you can do your own research. They're all going to be roughly the same. We're going to need like the doctors, the engineers, the accountants, the teachers, and the data analysts, and all that sort of stuff. And others might go up and down. But I encourage you to focus less on what it is exactly and more like, will you be good at it? Are you interested and passionate about it? And when you do that, that helps future-proof yourself. And taking a look at all those soft skills will be something that if you can do that, and I find that Canada specifically is a great breeding ground for all that sort of stuff because there's a natural tendency for people to bring a lot of that in there, right? And I encourage you to take a look at all of those, and hopefully we'll see you around in Canada as we get there. But back to that question, does where you went to school determine your success? No, it doesn't. But it can definitely give you a huge advantage, right? So if you start off at a good school, you're probably more likely to be more successful in your career. That doesn't mean that if you start at a less or a different type of school, you won't be as successful. So it's really up to you for you to future-proof your own career. But if you can have that advantage, why wouldn't you, right? So I encourage you to think of that. That's kind of what I had for you. I would love if folks in the chat, if you're willing to share, what is one takeaway that I shared with you that was impactful, that was memorable, that you never thought of, that was different, or something that you might do in the future, right? I'd love for folks to kind of share, this is something that I learned, this is something that was surprising to me, that was memorable and interesting. I'd love for you to start peppering the chat with that. Otherwise, I encourage folks to connect with me. So for those of you who are on LinkedIn, if you don't know what LinkedIn is, it's kind of like Facebook for business, right? For those that don't know what Facebook is, it's kind of like Instagram with no pictures or TikTok with less videos, depending on what social media platform you're using these days. But it's a social media platform and a lot of professionals do that. And if you're really interested in a career in Canada, then I encourage you to learn it and leverage it. And I could definitely be helpful with that. I have a YouTube channel as well with a lot of useful career and job insights as well. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. You can grab the URL from the chat, and I think there's some other ones there. So I know there's a lot of questions there, and I'll let Welly kind of moderate the chat. I see a hand up as well. Welly, I'd love if you can help moderate the chat and pick who goes first in terms of that. Yeah, I see some folks in the chat. So the 5221 example, there's the non-negotiable time as well. So yeah, I'm glad people took notes, and hopefully you'll implement it into your life. So thanks everyone for your attention on a Saturday morning for yourself. And if I'm happy to answer any questions.